Hello everyone, welcome back to the new video. In this video, we will understand about the dependency injection and the clean architecture. First, let's go to our block list view model. And here we have defined one function to get the blocks. And we are creating the object of this class directly here and using that to get the blocks. But this is not the right way. Here viewModel class only has the job of storing and managing UI state and user actions. The viewModel doesn't need to know how or from where the data is fetched, whether you are fetching the data from local database, network, cache, etc. So to define this correctly, we need to create an interface in our domain package. So here let's create one more package with the name repository and keep one interface with the name blog repository. And here define the function get all blogs. This function will return us the list of blogs and keep this list nullable. And next thing in our data package, create one more package with the name repository and we need to create the implementation of this repository interface. So create one class with the same name blog repository and implementation. This will be a class. Let's extend our class with this interface. And here press Ctrl I and OK. So in our view model, we don't need to get this Ktor remote data source object directly. Let's cut this code from here. Use it in our blog repository implementation. And in our view model, we will get the interface object but from the outside. Create one private val blog repository and use it here blog repository dot get all blogs, and this will be simply a blogs and we don't need to convert these blocks. And go back to our repository implementation and use our remote data store dot get all blocks and use the return keyword, and we need to convert these blocks to blocks list. So now if you need to change the data source, for example move from Ktor to retrofit or room to another database, you only update the repository implementation without modifying the view model. Now the repository can decide whether to fetch the data from a remote API or use locally cached data. This way our codebase will be flexible, scalable and testable. Now our view model is free from any implementation details. But next thing we are doing wrong here in our repository implementation, again we are creating this block data source class object here. So again we need to create an interface, then that interface should deal with this repository implementation. So in our remote package, create one more interface with the name remote blog data source. And again define one function with the same name get all blogs, and this will again return us the list of blog DTOs. This will be a nullable list and our repository will deal with this interface, and we are going to provide the object of this interface from outside. And delete this part. So here we have our repository implementation free from any remote data source implementation details. And this remote block data source, let's implement this interface to this class Ktor remote data source. Just extend this class with this interface and we just need to use override modifier, and we have that functions implementation here. Now our blog repository implementation doesn't need to know the exact details of how remote data is fetched, whether you are using Ktor, Retrofit, Firebase, etc. And in future, suppose if you decide to change the remote data source, For example, move from Ktor to retrofit. You only update the remote data source implementation without modifying the repository. This keeps the architecture modular and maintainable. And this will also help you in testing. You can easily mock the remote data source without making any actual request. Now, by doing all this code management, if we go to our main activity, and we will see that this view model function will not create the object of this block list view model. Why? Because if you go to this view model, then we need to provide the object of this repository interface. Next thing, we need to specify that this block repository interface has an implementation. And again, if we go to our implementation, then again we need to provide the object of this remote data store interface to this repository implementation. And there we have a class which is depend on another class. And we need to inject the object of that class to this class. So this is the dependency injection. So to provide the object to this block list view model, we have two options now. Either we can create objects manually. On a large scale project, that would be quite difficult. But here comes the role of Koin library. That Koin library can provide the object to all of these classes. We just need to set up few things. So first thing, in our Android blocks, create one more file with the name main application. And let's extend this with application class. And override the onCreate function, and here use our start Koin. So as soon as our application will be created, so this start Koin function will start running, and here we need to define few things. First, let's use Android logger so we can log details related to this Koin library. And next thing, we need to specify this Android context. So wherever this Koin library will need the context, that context can be taken from here. And we need to specify that the context will come from this main application. And we need to register our application class to our manifest file here. And close it. Next thing, we need to create a module where we will define everything about how Koin needs to create the objects. So let's use the modules function and create one more package with the name di. Create one file with the name Koin main module. This will be a single module, and use our main module in our application class here. So our next main job is to defining how it needs to create all the objects. So let's start from the starting. First, our data is coming from the Ktor remote data source class. Here we have one function which is getting the data from the network, and this class is extending this interface. So here this class needs the object of this HTTP client. So let's create this object. Use the single function and HTTP client factory dot create. And this functions need the engine, so we have this OK HTTP dot create. So our Ktor remote data source class will get the object from this Koin module, and here we have just defined that we have one HTTP client factory object, and there we have defined one create function here, and this function will give us the object of this HTTP client. Now next thing, this data is going to the repository, this repository implementation. So this class also needs the object of this remote block data source interface. So again we need to define this thing. Go to our Koin main module, and one more thing, we also need to specify that this interface has one implementation also. So Coin needs to also bind that implementation to this interface. So here we have one function with the name single of, and first thing we need to define that we have one Ktor remote block data source and use these two colons, and it needs to be bind to remote block data source interface. We need to define this as a type. Now the Coin what will do? It will give this class an object of this interface, and it will also bind that interface into its implementation. Now next our data is going from this repository to our view model here, and this view model also needs the object of this blog repository interface, and that interface has one implementation. So again we need to do the same thing. Go to our Coin main module. Again let's define single of function with first the implementation, use double colons, and we need to bind this implementation to its interface. And this is how the Coin will provide the object of this blog repository to this view model. Now from here this data is going to the screen, and that screen we are using in our main activity, and here we are creating the view model object. So again we don't need to do anything else, the Coin will do the work. So here instead of defining the view model like this, we need to use the Coin view model and use the blog list view model. And one more thing we need to do in our Coin main module, we need to specify that we have one view model. It needs to create the object. So let's use the view model of blog list view model and use double colon. And this is all the things we need to do to provide all these objects to different classes. First close all these files. And with these 4 lines of codes, Coin is doing all the magic behind the scene. So if I explain you briefly about the Coin, Coin is a lightweight dependency injection framework for Kotlin apps. It helps you manage and provide dependencies. Dependencies simply means the object in your app without needing complex configurations. In short, Coin helps keep your app clean, scalable, and maintainable without the complexity. Now let's run the app to see everything works fine. And here we have our app running as smoothly. There will be no change of any functionality, but now we have our code base as the scalable and maintainable. Hey everyone, if you are finding this tutorial helpful, you will love my premium Udemy course where we will build Measuremate, a fitness app using Jetpack Compose. We go in depth on the Firebase authentication, Firestore, and more. Check out the course in the description and take your skills to the next level. See you there. Now let's have an understanding of apps architecture. Apps architecture simply means how we manage our code base. For our application, we are using clean architecture. Clean architecture is a software design philosophy that aims to create scalable, maintainable, and testable code. It separates an application's code into distinct layers, each with a specific responsibility, making the code easier to understand, maintain, and test. In clean architecture, we divide our whole code base into 3 different layers. First, we have this presentation layer. It handles the UI and user interactions. Next, domain layer. It has the responsibility of containing the business logic and rules. And next, data layer. It has the responsibility to managing the data sources and handles data operations. Here we implement the repository interfaces defined in the domain layer. And as we can see in our project, we have already divided our whole code base into these three layers. Now let's see what are the components each layer contains. First, presentation layer. It contains composables where we define the UI and handles user interactions. View model to keep UI state and manage user interactions. Navigation where we handle navigation between different screens. And as we can see in our presentation layer, we have screen composable functions and the view model. And the navigation we will provide in the future videos in this presentation layer. Next we have the domain layer. It contains the models where we define the business objects, repository interfaces where we define the methods for accessing data, providing an abstraction between the domain layer and the data layer, and also use cases. So in our project we have this domain layer and we have the models and the repository. Next we have the data layer. It contains the remote data source where we manage the network request. Local data source where we manage the local database operations. Repository implementation where we provide the concrete methods for data operations. Mappers where we convert data between different layers. And as we can see in our data layer, we have mappers and the remote data source and the repository implementation. And the local data source we will provide in the next video in this data layer. So this is the clean architecture, and that's the end of this video. We have successfully learned about the Coin library and how it provides the object to different classes, and we also had a brief intro on the clean architecture. In the next video, we will add the local database functionality to our app. As always, if you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to drop them down in the comment section. And if you are finding these videos helpful, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.